Hi, everyone. It is noon. And so welcome to the Lunch and Learn Selling a Tenanted Property with the new CEO of Rental Housing Saskatchewan, Landon Field. As always, housekeeping notes next. There is chat available, so please feel free to utilize that during the presentation. We will also have time for question and answer at the end. Please ensure that your microphones are muted. And just a reminder that this Lunch and Learn will be recorded and available on the SRA Learning Hub for those who are unable to attend, or should you wish to reference any of our topics afterwards. I will be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint as well as another document that Landon has prepared with the survey, should be this afternoon. So with us today is Landon. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Rental Housing Saskatchewan. As the voice of rental housing providers in Saskatchewan, their organization delivers knowledge, promotes best practices, and advocates for a strong and resilient rental housing industry. They are the leading community of industry professionals committed to providing safe, high-quality rental homes for the people of Saskatchewan. And with that, I will turn it over to Landon.
Thank you so much. And it's so good to be here. And I recognize a couple of names. So thank you all for attending today. This selling a property with tenants is still one of the topics that we discuss the most when it comes to supporting our real estate members, our realtors, as well as our property owners who are looking to sell. As you all know, the market is hot right now. So this is also a hot topic in our office. So thanks again for having me here. So I'll just start by talking a little bit about what Rental Housing Saskatchewan is. As was mentioned earlier, we are the voice of rental housing providers right here in Saskatchewan. We represent over 1,000 individual members right across the province. We're proud to be the leading community of industry professionals who are proud to provide safe, high-quality rental homes for the people of Saskatchewan. I will just put a little disclaimer here that the information here should not be constituted as legal advice or counsel from our office. It's more from an educational perspective at this point. And another disclaimer before we start, I know that there's a couple of realtors who have maybe lost a couple bets over the advice that I've given on whether when it comes to selling a tenanted property. So if I do owe you a drink, make sure to connect with me afterwards and we can get that taken care of. We'll start today by talking a little bit about the types of tenancies that exist. So there are two different types, the first being periodic or month-to-month tenancy. It can also be weekly. This continues kind of in perpetuity. There's no defined end date in the contract. It can be ended by the tenant with a month's notice, with no grounds. There are other ways that the landlord can end the tenancy that would require notice to be given. A fixed term agreement, that is where there's a specific end date written into the contract. Most commonly, this is a 1 year rental agreement. This is very common throughout the industry. It can be renewed or ended with 2 months notice of intention prior to the end of the lease. So there is the option to renew a fixed term agreement, and the month to month just continues on. It's an important note to remember that a landlord can't just end a month-to-month tenancy with 1 month's notice for no reason. There are ways to evict a tenant or end a tenancy. Tenants can provide the 1 month's notice with no reason, but the landlords cannot for month-to-month tenancies. So the 2 month notice of intention form, this is what the form looks like. It's available on our website as well as the Office of Residential Tenancies. They settle all disputes between landlords and tenants when it gets to a point where the tenant's not willing to leave on their own or there's a claim filed against the landlord. This is what that form looks like. So the landlord does have the ability to renew the lease at a new rate, end the lease, or switch to month. There's a little bit of flexibility. Again, this is just for fixed term tenancies. Month to month ends differently. So when we talk about how tenancies end, when the agreement comes to an end, when the terms of the agreement are not met. And that means there's non-payment of rent. The tenant has fallen into arrears, whether that's for rent or utilities. When it gets to a point where it's 15 days in arrears, there can be an immediate eviction notice served against the tenant. This can also be included for repeated late payment of rent, behavior issues, if they're jeopardizing the health and safety of the property or of the landlord. Those are all instances of cause, which is 1 month's notice to end a tenancy. If they breach the tenancy agreement or landlord rules, if they're bringing over a bunch of friends that are not included on the lease and there's an unreasonable number of people that are living at the property, or if they don't pay their security deposit, all of those instances can lead to an eviction, which would end a tenancy. And if it gets to a point where if you are a rental housing provider yourself and you're not sure which form to fill out or what type of notice to serve, that's where you can contact our office for more in-depth support. When it comes to listing a rental property, it's really important to confirm the tenancy details with the seller. You want to know the type of tenancy, especially if it's a fixed term agreement, if there's that guaranteed end date, or if they're just on a month-to-month or periodic lease. You also want to ensure that you know what the current rental rate is, any rental increases that have been given or notices that have been given for the rent to go up, or you want to avoid publishing any future rents because they may not be guaranteed. You want to ensure if they have a written agreement, if they can provide that document to you, or if it's a verbal agreement and provide those details. You also want to ensure if the security deposit has been paid in full, if it's being held in trust, and include the security deposit as a condition of the sale if it gets to that point. You'd want to make sure that you're accurately publishing details in member-to-member remarks. So don't just say basement suite currently rented with great tenants. You want to make sure that it's the details of the lease are included, whether or not you're going to be selling a tenanted property or if you're going to be selling the property with the hopes of no tenants in the suite. When it comes to showing a rental property to a prospective purchaser, the tenant does have rights. They're given exclusive possession of the rental unit during the term of their tenancy, so they have the right to quiet enjoyment and reasonable privacy, as well as free from unreasonable disturbances. That's that exclusive possession of the unit that I just mentioned. So the landlord does need to provide notice when they will be entering the unit, whether that's for showings, taking pictures, doing an inspection, anything like that, notice has to be served to the tenant. So there is a 24-hour notice period that is required if you're going to be going in to take pictures or look at the property. If you're going to be selling or showing the property, 24 hours needs to be provided by the landlord between the hours of 8 and 8, and typically not on Sundays or days of worship. Are there any questions so far? I'm just rolling right along, but feel free to message in the chat or put your hand up if you have any questions or need some clarification on anything. This is that notice of entry form. Again, it's available online on our website, rentalhousingsk.ca, as well as the Office of Residential Tenancies. This would need to be served to the tenant, and it cannot be served more than 1 week in advance. Some important reminders when you're showing a property with tenants. If there are tenants living there, it might be recommended that they store any identifying photos and materials to protect their privacy. That's for listing, for taking pictures, and for showings. You also might want to accompany prospective purchasers throughout the property to ensure that they respect the tenant's privacy, and try and schedule back-to-back showings if possible. That again limits the invasiveness of entering the unit. You may also be able to just serve the one notice. If you're coming to do showings tomorrow afternoon, you can provide that notice to them and have access to the property during that time. When a purchaser is selling their tenanted property, it's very important to understand their intent. Uh, if they're buying a property, do you want to become a housing provider? Like, is becoming a landlord something that you're wanting to do? This property currently has tenants. The tenants are willing to stay. If you're willing to stay on as the landlord, that's great. You can then create a new agreement or just continue the existing one. If the purchaser does not want to be a rental housing provider, they're not interested in being a landlord, they want to live in this unit, then an eviction is required. We'll need to end the tenancy to ensure that that can happen. So when it comes to evicting the tenants, if they are on a month-to-month tenancy, yes, it's very straightforward. There's a couple of forms that can be served, but an eviction would be appropriate and is completely legal. For fixed term agreements, an eviction is not allowed if the property changes hands. The tenancy is tied to the property, not necessarily the landlord. So the tenants are paying rent, they're at a fixed term agreement for 1 year for that unit. Just because the landlord changed doesn't mean that the rental agreement changed. That those tenants on a fixed term agreement are entitled to stay in the unit for the duration of their lease. And then that 2 month notice of intention form that I spoke about earlier, that indicates the future of fixed term tenancies, that would be served to the tenants at that point to ensure that they would not continue the lease afterwards. So that's the big difference. That's why it's very important to understand intent, understand what type of tenancy is going on with the property, because month to month, yes, you can go forward with an eviction. Fixed term, not so fast. So this is the other form that we'll be sending out. It's kind of a flow chart that's easy to understand. You can reference this, contact our office if you have any questions. So we will be supplying this form as well. But this kind of just walks you through step by step what happens when you're selling a tenanted property. So start if you want to become a housing provider or landlord. Yes, the agreement continues. And if no, then the tenancy will need to be ended. So then you move from there if the tenancy can be ended. If not, that's when you move into that fixed term agreement. So a 2 month intention form has to be served 2 months before the completion of the tenancy, and the purchaser must inherit the tenant and the tenancy agreement, and they become the new landlord in that situation. So fixed term tenancies cannot be ended if the property changes owners. For month to month tenancies, if the notice to vacate is given before possession, if that's kind of what a stipulation of the purchasing agreement, you can serve 1 month's notice that the purchaser intends to occupy the unit for them to live in. That's 1 month's notice. It's the end of the following month. So that would be given. After possession, the notice to vacate owner occupy. So if you miss those timelines and the owner intends to move into the unit, you can serve 2 months notice and the owner will be able to move in.
Landon, we do have a question in the chat. Raylene has asked, this may come up later in the presentation, but she had a client that had a rental property they were considering selling. The tenant signed a 1-year lease in December 2020, and then no further documents were signed in December 2021. Are these tenants now considered month to month? And what are the issues, or are there any issues with not having anything in writing from December 2021 to present?
That's a great question, Raylene. If that lease was signed back in 2020 and no further documentation was ever signed to extend the lease or no fixed term agreement was extended, you're correct. They are now considered month to month or periodic tenancies. So when someone is on a fixed term agreement, if you do not send that 2 month notice of intention form to continue the lease or change the structure of the lease, it's considered that they are now month to month or periodic, which means they are indefinite tenants to the property. So that's where you would then reference the month to month tenancy questions, which is serving the 1 month's notice that the purchaser intends to occupy and move into the unit when it's sold. Again, 1 month's notice, but you're absolutely correct. It is super important to document, keep things in writing. If nothing is documented, it's deemed that it automatically becomes a periodic or month to month tenancy.
You good, Raylene? Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Landon.
Perfect. We'll move on to what these forms look like. So the notice to vacate, purchaser occupies the unit. This again is that 1 month notice to terminate the tenancy. This is an eviction notice that would be served by the landlord to the tenant and provides that notice of eviction. All you have to do is ensure that the box is checked, that the purchaser intends to occupy the rental unit in good faith. The notice to vacate, the owner intends to occupy. So again, the difference in these two forms is the notice period. The purchaser occupy form is served before the purchaser actually takes possession of the unit. The owner occupy would be served if they've taken possession of the unit and then will be moving in. So it's important to make sure that you're following the correct timeline so that these notices don't get missed and then you're delayed potentially moving into the unit or into the house by an additional month. So this form would be served if they've already taken possession. The three key components to serving these eviction applications are that it's done in good faith, so the rental unit will be sold and the purchaser will be moving in. All conditions of the sale have been satisfied, and the purchaser has requested to end the tenancy in writing. So again, ensure that you're documenting this when you're completing the sale. Otherwise, as it says right there, this contract, it would be completed. The purchase price will be paid and fully paid, and vacant possession will be delivered by X on the first day of March, or the completion day. If the completion day is not a business day, then the payment of purchase price will be completed by noon the preceding business day. So that is something that you can include in your contract when you're selling. When it comes to serving the notice, 1 month's notice is not as simple as 30 days. If I serve notice on October 17th to end a tenancy, when would they need to move out by? It is actually the end of November. So it's always the 1 month's notice actually means the end of the following month. So the time possession date accordingly to ensure that proper notice can be given. If you have tenants in a property, you need to serve that 1 month's notice. Just know that it's not 30 days and make sure that that's communicated to the buyer. Sometimes we'll run into issues where the tenant will dispute the notice. They don't want to move out. We know right now that the market is extremely tight, it's extremely hot, and people don't necessarily want to vacate the property. So tenants do have the ability to dispute that notice, and they can file a claim with the Office of Residential Tenancies, at which point, more than likely, the landlord can contact our office for further support to ensure that the claim and hearing go accordingly. But the tenant does have the right to dispute the notice within 15 days of accepting an eviction. So if it gets to that point, there may be further delays. However, if the notice was served correctly with the correct dates, following the correct procedure, and you have a proof of sale of the property, it's extremely black and white when it gets to a hearing. That evidence would just need to be presented. And I see that there's a question here as well.
So Shelley asks, if the property is being listed but is not sold, can we serve 60 days notice now before we list? Or is this a month-to-month arrangement?
Right. If it's listed, but it's not yet sold, an eviction notice can't be given to the tenants because, as it says earlier, there's no one that's in good faith moving into the unit to end the tenancy. So, unfortunately, you would have to wait until the property has been sold in order to give 1 month's notice that the tenants would be evicted, that the purchaser would be moving in. You can also communicate to the tenants, and this is an important note when you're working with a seller who is a landlord. They oftentimes will be able to communicate with the tenants and say, you know what, I am going to be listing this property. You have the ability to move out at any time. If you can have that arrangement with the tenants and they're willing to accommodate move-ins, make sure that it's documented in writing, but that is something that can be used and is often used as well. It's just that having that communication, hey, we're selling the house. The buyers are looking to move in at the start of next month. Is there any way that you guys can be out at the end of this month? We will be serving an official eviction to make sure that the legal process is followed correctly. But if you can get that in writing and create that deal, they are able to move in sooner.
You good,
Hopefully that
Shelley?
answered your question.
Sorry. Okay. I think, go ahead, Landon.
Perfect. So when it comes to ending the tenancy and transferring ownership, you want to ensure that the seller, the landlord, has completed a move-out inspection. They retrieve any keys or any fobs associated with the property, and they've communicated the result of a damage deposit within 7 business days, even if costs aren't finalized. Landlords have to stick to the 7 business days timeline. Nothing necessarily needs to be filed with ORT, but there is a form that needs to be given to the tenant within the 7 business days of the tenancy ending, whether that's to cover rent arrears, any damage to the property, any reason that the security or damage deposit would need to be claimed, that form would need to be served. And that's something to check off to make sure. If you're selling on a fixed term agreement, make sure that you understand where the security deposit is and that it's been transferred to the new owner. Landlords have the ability to proceed with a monetary claim if necessary. So after that 7 business days, it turns out that claims for damages are actually going to be exceeding the deposit. There's more damage to the property than was initially thought. We can then file a monetary claim against the tenant to try and recover some of those costs. You want to ensure that any copies of any documents related to the rental housing provider or to the agreement are provided to the buyer, and to send communication to the tenants outlining the new contact information. So that's if the fixed term agreement or month to month, if the tenants are staying in the property, you want to ensure that they have access to who their new landlord is so they understand when rent should be paid and who it's paid to. And that is important to detail, obviously.
Hi, this is Shelley. I'm just a little bit confused on that answer to my question. So, what we have here is a tenant on a month to month. We're going to list it in the beginning of July. My owner wants to serve her notice now, 60 days, so that she can be prepared to move if we don't find a buyer that would take her on as a tenant or keep her as a tenant. But you're telling me we can't give her 60 days notice because we don't have a firm sale?
Correct. So because the tenant is living in the property, they have exclusive access to the property. The 2 months notice that she's referring to, there's no 60-day notice. It would be the 2 month notice of intent that the owner intends to occupy the unit. If you're saying that the owner is intending to move into the unit, then she can serve that 60 or that 2 months notice that for owner occupy. But if there's no buyer, if their sale is not kind of finalized, then an eviction notice would not be deemed in good faith and could not be served.
So we would have to list the property, and when we have a firm sale, then we only need to give her 30 days notice?
1 month's notice, correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
The Residential Tenancies Act is the legislation that governs rental housing in the province. This is the law that is referenced and why all of these forms are necessary. And right in there, it says that subject to the act, the new landlord has the same rights and is subject to the same liabilities and obligations as the former landlord, which basically means that if there is a new landlord that is obtaining a property with tenants, the existing tenancy agreement would remain in place. That's pretty much what it says. The security deposit is held in trust by the former landlord. That should then be transferred to the new property owner. Every new landlord is substituted as the existing landlord in the tenancy agreements. So when they obtain a property, you're now a housing provider, the landlord just switches out. There's no need to rewrite a tenancy agreement or create something new. The tenants can sign on and agree to a new lease agreement if that's something that both parties agree to in writing. Otherwise, the tenancy remains the same. If you don't like the tenancy agreement that's in place, if the rent seems like it's not at the level that you would like to see, amendments have to be agreed to by both parties. If you sign a new month-to-month or periodic agreement, you'll now need to wait 12 months to raise the rent. There can be no rental increases within the first year of an agreement. So if it's a brand new agreement, no rental increase can be provided. However, if you're just obtaining the lease and it remains the same, you can serve a rental increase in accordance with the guidelines. On a fixed term agreement, amendments can be suggested at the time of renewal. However, as we mentioned, those fixed term agreements are locked in until that end date. The tenant can disagree and move out if it's a deal breaker. So if there is a new property owner, a new landlord that obtains these tenants, they suggest amendments. It doesn't work out. The tenants have the ability to then leave the agreement. So in terms of organizational support that our association can offer landlords, we do have a general landlord membership. So this would be if you are a current rental housing provider. It comes with limited legal services, unlimited information, access to our events, and in-depth support to ensure that the regulations are followed and that all of this procedural stuff is done correctly. We also have access to sample lease agreements, warning letters, and more. The base price of our membership is $139 a year. We also have a brokerage option. So this is the service membership. If your brokerage is interested in obtaining limited legal services, access to information, access to our networking events and educational events, this is not meant for individual housing providers. This is more meant just on the brokerage side, and it is something that's available. So you can reach out to our office if you have any other questions related to the membership. And I know it's a very confusing and procedural heavy process. And so I appreciate any and all questions that you may have. My contact information is listed on the screen, so you can also reach out afterwards. But if you have any questions today, I'm happy to answer those and help you out to ensure that those sales can be as smooth as possible. I think you're muted. Sorry.
I'm muted. I said it's very quiet out there. And then I said Landon is CEO at rhsk.ca, 306-653-7149 or 306-861-2646. As I said at the beginning, you will all be getting a copy of this, so you will have the information and the contact information if you need it any further. So thank you, Landon, for your presentation, and thank you for being here, the rest of you. This is the last scheduled event prior to the summer break. If you are commercial practitioners, please watch for the announcement of the revamped commercial network, which should be coming out this week. Our first scheduled meetings are July 8th in Saskatoon and July 9th in Regina. And over the summer, our team will be hard at work planning the upcoming events. Keep an eye on the portal for updates. Have a great summer, and we'll see you in the fall. And one last thing, our next YPN event will be in Regina again. I believe it will be at the Mackenzie Art Center, and it's going to be someone that Regina knows well, as Darcy Lang will be discussing focus on you, how to be the best person, and show up to work every day in a great frame of mind. So more information will come out after the summer break. Thank you all.